Hello. Today we're going to talk about the slave codes and the black community. First of all, slave codes were laws that dehumanized the black people. They stated that black people couldn't have the same rights as white people. For example, if a black person was attacked by a white person, the black person couldn't actually defend himself. Also, black people weren't allowed to have property or any type of land. Women were frequently subjected to rape and sexual assault. Many of them tried to defend themselves, but at the same time, many of them died. If a black woman tried to defend herself, they would get punished, and at the same time, they could get just attacked. And the white people could also get away with it. This is a large violation of the human rights, since the black women, they couldn't defend themselves, and they just had to live with it.
We are here with Ms. Sarah Viven, a Mexican history teacher and philosophy teacher.
Hello.
And we're going to be asking her some questions about the slave codes. So first off, what are the slave codes and why were the slave codes created?
So the slave codes essentially put into law how people were pretty much already traditionally treating their slaves. But it made it so that it was in writing. Each state kind of had different slave codes. The French, the British, different colonizers also had different slave codes. But it was just to ensure that everyone agreed on how they were supposed to be treating their slaves to sort of keep them oppressed and keep them below their owners.
How and why did the slave codes deprive the slaves of basic human rights, such as learning to read?
So they're put there to basically ensure that the slaves stayed within their place in society, and the owners didn't allow them any freedoms. So it was a means of oppression because if they can't gather together, if they can't learn to read or they can't write, they can't carry a weapon or they can't marry anyone, then they keep them isolated, they keep them ignorant, and unable to basically get together and revolt against them.
As you see here we have a slave. Let's talk to him. Hello, how do you feel about your life?
I think it's horrible. It's not fair that I cannot learn to read or write. And also my slave master can do whatever he pleases with me. It's horrible.
Not only could slaves not defend themselves, but at the same time they couldn't get a proper education. All their lives they had to live as a slave.
Okay. Do you think the slave codes are meant to dehumanize the black community? How do you think they achieve this? In what ways?
So I do think they were there to dehumanize. I think the slave codes were there as much to ensure that it was in writing that the slaves were to be treated a certain way, as to also keep their owners in line. Because if owners were ever to be like, oh, I feel bad for them, I want to teach them this way that is against the law. So they're also keeping the owners in line in order to keep that division between the two of them. And if these are people who don't know how to read or don't know how to write, they won't see them as being equals. So they'll always keep them in this subhuman category, and then they won't feel bad about beating them or separating a mother from her child or any of those things.
Okay, so finally, how do you think these laws impacted the slaves psychologically? Do you think they were made to make them think of themselves as inferior?
So in certain aspects, yes. I think it was used to make them feel like there was no way up. This was their life and this was always going to be their life. And so taking away hope from them, kind of like wage slavery does with a lot of people today, if they don't feel like they have anything to work towards, and maybe not only them, but their future generations won't be able to leave the reality that they're in. It ends up causing a sense of hopelessness and a very nihilistic worldview. As soon as there's hope, then you have something to work for, even if it's 3 generations down. But if you take that away, then you're always going to have these people who are just in submission.